Welcome. Thank you for taking the time joining me here after lunch for a pretty advanced session around OS deployment. If you don't like scripts, command prompts, PowerShell, there is a chance you might not like this session. So, the session I had earlier today, how many of you were in it? A few of you. That was a beginner session. This is more in depth, put it that way. I'm still Johan. I still have questions, so anytime during the session, if you have anything, just raise your hand and ask. Be happy to answer it. How many of you consider yourself to be like really hardcore PowerShell people? One in the back. I have a challenge for you. I found out about it last night. It turned out to be like a 10-month-old post, but I was laughing. There is a hardcore mode you can enable in PowerShell. Let me show you that one. I blogged about it. Thought it was a good tweet. Let me launch Summit. This one. If you type anything wrong, it will shut down your machine. As long as you get everything right, you're good to go. I've seen an even more evil version where it actually removes all files from the machine as well. That's more scary. Shutdown I can sort of live with. So the deal is PowerShell is one of these technologies that if you want to work with IT in the year of 2015, you simply have to deal with the fact that you need to learn not maybe all of it, but some of it. Because automation is king in terms of doing stuff for OS deployment. I mean, we do OS deployment with sequences because we don't want to do stuff manually. And PowerShell is just a very powerful engine to do that, hence the name. All right. This was from the very beginning a pure ConfigMgr session, but since I always integrate ConfigMgr with MDT in all my setups, like 99% of what I'll be demonstrating here today will be even applicable for you that runs MDT as a standalone solution too. Purely by accident, but that's simply how the integration works. The same scripts, the same rules, the same logic, the same methods applies to both these platforms. So this is what we're going to focus on for the next hour here. Now, I'm a Microsoft MVP. I spend my days traveling this blue planet of ours, helping customers implement and troubleshoot OSD solutions. And I've been doing that for a long time. I started when I was 16, and that was 25 years ago. So that means two things. It means, one, I'm, well, old. Two, I might not have seen everything, but I've seen a lot. So if you have anything that you stumble into, that you have any questions about, ping me. Follow me on Twitter, send me an email, visit my blog site, do something. There is a chance I've actually seen that, or at least have an idea about, all right, what way to go to fix that problem. So don't hesitate. I'm normally pretty good in responding to postings. All right. Today I've been using the same demo environment, both for my Windows 10 session earlier and essentially right now. I have a bunch of virtual machines, and this set is available for download, as I mentioned this morning. If you go to my blog site and you search for the keyword hydration, and as I said this morning, has nothing to do with beer or water. It's simply a term for using a script to set up a complete lab with everything you need. And for example, the most commonly used one, and the one I recommend to start with, is the kit for System Center. Because that script that controls the deployment share has the capabilities of create the following virtual machines for you. As a general tip, I recommend that you start building the domain controller, because all the other VMs, if you decided to build any of those, will try to join the domain. And it kind of helps if the domain controller at that point is up and running. They will fail otherwise. So to give an example, if I open my deployment workbench, you can see the massive download size, by the way. It's almost 300K to download, so it's a big script. But you need to copy some files to some folders to get it to work. But the thing that you download is just a ready-made deployment share, where you have one sequence for each type of server or client you want to build. So for example, if I open up the domain controller sequence, this is indeed a sequence that does everything that is necessary for a machine to become a domain controller. Install DNS, Active Directory, install DHCP, create some scopes, create some OUs, some subnets, install PKI because you normally need one, and then you're done. And then there is also a sequence, for example, for ConfigMgr, a complete sequence that does everything that is done or needed to be done for a ConfigMgr site server. Install the .NET, WS, all the prereqs, SQL, Open Firewall, configure memory, install ADK, set permissions, extend AD, and install the site server. So everything that it's in this sequence. So what we need to do is three things here. You need to download the kit. If you want to, you can open it in Workbench and you can review it, but you don't have to. But what you need to do is copy files and folders. So for example, when you download the kit, there will be a folder named DS for deployment share. There will be an applications folder, and in here there will be a SQL folder. And the SQL folder will have a source folder. That's where you copy your SQL files. Either the full versions or the trial versions that you download. I have tested with both. And you continue to do that. For example, you will go to the ConfigMgr installation, source folder, and you copy in the ConfigMgr files. And obviously, if you only intend to build a domain controller and ConfigMgr, you only need to copy those files. So what I did on my blog is that for each of the roles, later down in the blog, I listed what software you needed to download for that function or that machine. So it's a lot of copy and pasting. It will take you easily up to 20 minutes to complete that. So you download it, unpack, you copy some files, and then what you do is you go to the advanced node, or you can do it in PowerShell, you right-click media, and you say update content. Because when you do, it will create a giant ISO file for you. And Zoom it just decided to, all right, here we go. Da-dum-dum. Please wake up. That's a new one. Ah, here we go. Great tips. Right-clicking. Escape normally works, but right-click works too. Thank you, sir. You have earned a spotlight position there. All right. In this folder, I used to consider myself a Zoom it master, but I stay humble. Anyway, you get the giant ISO file, and then you simply create a bunch of VMs and you boot on this ISO. It doesn't have to be Hyper-V, it could be VMware or whatever virtual platform you like. You just have to be able to boot of an ISO. And if you guys are using a virtual platform not capable of booting on an ISO, switch to something else. They're supposed to handle that. So what I will do, I have Kent in the audience, I can see. So I will create a domain controller for Kent. And I will store it somewhere. Not generation 1, generation 2, they are faster. Give it some memory. Network helps. Some disk. And on each VM I have listed also on the blog how much disk you need to assign for them to work. About 100 gig for a domain controller is just fine. Of course I could have configured it to boot on the media directly, but I forgot, so I will add that in. And I will simply select the ISO. And I will start the VM. And I will wait. And press any key. So the machine boots on the VM. If you look in the extra folders, of the download. There will be a source and there will be an extra folder. Here are PowerShell scripts that will build the virtual machines as well, if you don't like to click around in the UI like I did. So both Gen 1 or Gen 2 VMs. The Windows 7 clients still have to be Gen 1 because Windows 7 doesn't like UEFI much. But this is basically just the PowerShell script that builds all the VMs for you. So once I have booted on this, I simply need to select what type of role this machine is supposed to be. So again, you start with the domain controller, you hit next, and you have coffee for about 22 minutes, because when you come back, you have a domain controller, DNS, and DHCP server. Everything up and running. And then you leave that VM running, and you create a new one, and then you select some of the others. So within about an hour or two, you have a lab environment that you can start to play around with. And every single one in this room, if you leave this conference with only remembering one thing, that thing is that you deserve, truly deserve, from your manager to get a NIC solid-state drive. Because that is key to have a lab environment going. You can have, don't do this, but you could have a really old ThinkPad, T420. It's a Core i5 machine. I mean, that's a I don't know, $600 PC or $500. But if you put a solid-state drive in that box, in that machine, an SSD, it actually is powerful enough to run a complete ConfigMgr environment in a lab and test environment. So if you can find anything that is better than this and put a solid-state drive in it, at least 480, and enable deduplication on it, there is no limit what you can actually do on that box in terms of a normal lab scenario. Deduplication allows you to store a lot of VMs on an SSD, almost 2 terabytes, consuming only 100 on disk. And no, there is no performance decrease at all because of how fast the SSDs are. So I don't recommend to enable the schedule. That is optional when you install dedupe. Every month when I start to run out of disk space on my machine, I simply run a PowerShell script that kicks off the deduplication process. And then I suddenly have a few hundred megs left, and I continue to work another month with my VMs. Because what the deduplication does is that it simply takes all the files and just chops them into small pieces. And every identical piece has been thrown away. This can also be useful when transferring files over network. I was doing a class with Kent in New York about a year ago, year and a half maybe. And I could have sworn that I copied all the VMs needed for that training with me to New York on my laptop. When I got in my hotel, I didn't. I hadn't done that. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was only about 103 gigs of VMs that I now needed to download on the hotel Wi-Fi from Sweden to New York. And I'm not sure how many of you that frequently stayed at hotels, but I can tell you this is stretching it, what you can download. So what I ended up with was a PowerShell script, PowerShell again. So if you search for beyond zip, I was able to crank this one down from 183 to 16 gigs using PowerShell. So this PowerShell script, which is all down here, or there's a download available, what it will do, it will create a VHDX file, enable deduplication on it, copy some files to it, run the dedupe job, and then close it. And then it became about 25, 30 gigs, and then I zipped that file with 7-zip on the highest ultra level compression. So that allowed me to crank down that amount of stuff into such file. That's pretty cool. And it's just an archive. It's just a file that you copy. I actually splitted it because I didn't trust the hotel link to be available. But that's something you can do with PowerShell. Now, so that was the lab environment. No excuses for not having a lab. And your manager should give you a solid state drive. You can tell him or her that Johan said so. When we do OS deployment, we need reference images. Not technically, but trust me on this, you want to have one. For example, if you deploy Windows 7 today, there are a few updates, right, that needs to be installed. Do you want to do that once, or do you want to do it every time you deploy that WIM file? You want to do it once. And that's like 150 of them. So yes, it becomes key to actually automate things for that as well. I always recommend, no matter what you deploy with, to use light touch to create that reference image. Even if you're using ConfigMgr for your production deployment, I don't care. Use light touch to create that reference image. Why? Because it always bloody works. That's why. There are other reasons as well, but that's the main reason. It always works. So with that, I can easily automate a lot of things. So for example, what I do, I don't go to my ConfigMgr server for sure. Well, you could have your share on the ConfigMgr server if you like, but normally you have your own machine or a file server where you store the MDT content. So what you do, you install MDT, you create a few sequences that hopefully contains most of the stuff that you want to do. For example, this is a Windows 8 sequence that installs a few components that can be useful to have in a reference image. And of course, it runs Windows Update and run updates as many times as needed. And all in all, it's an automated sequence. Now, to get that fully automated, you probably know by now that when you start a light touch deployment, it asks you for quite many things. But these are configured through the rules. So there is an ini file displayed here in the UI where I can simply say, hey, I don't care. Just don't give him too many questions. So for example, don't ask me for sequences. Don't ask me for capture. Just go ahead and then actually run the deployment. So to start the deployment, I need a VM that can boot on an ISO, that can connect to my share and start the deployment. That's not a big of a deal. I have one right here. This is a PowerShell script that creates a VM, boots it, wait until it's complete, and when it's done, it deletes it. So anytime I need a new reference image, I simply run that script. It creates a new VM and launches it. Connects automatically to my deployment share, runs the sequence, installs the OS, installs my apps, runs Windows updates as many times as needed, and reboots all the time. And in the very end, it will run sysprep, capture it, store it on server. So the end result for running this PowerShell script is I have a WIM file on my server that is ready to be deployed in production with ConfigMgr, with light touch, with whatever you are using, VMM, VMware, whatever. Well, if you're using VMware or VMM, you take this WIM file and you apply it to a disk so that you can clone that one later on. But it's the same WIM file, and that's the point. So this will run for about an hour, so I'm just going to kill it, but that's the main thing with this type of automation. Create sequences, automate everything. And yes, these scripts are available for download on my blog. So simply search for reference image and you'll find it. Now, there are some other things you can do. For example, I have a very good friend, Michael Nystrom, who's having a session on VMM later today that I recommend that you go to if you are interested in that. He took that one step more. Because a deployment share may have many sequences. You may be building reference images for Windows 7, 32 and 64, Windows 8, 32 and 64, a few servers. So you may have 6, 7, 8 sequences that you need to build a reference image for every once in a while. So he developed something called Deployment Factory. So if you go to his site, which is, this is not a joke, I promise you, it's Deployment Bunny, the name of the site. And if it answers, if I have the internet gods with me, you can simply search for Image Factory and you can download that solution. I happen to have it installed right here, so I will go to another machine. Close this one. So in here, I have downloaded his script to a folder. Image Factory contains a folder with some scripts and a PowerShell module. The XML file is where you store the configuration, meaning things like, okay, where is my ISO? Where is my deployment share? Where do I want my VMs to be staged? Things like that. But that's just a configuration file. Then I import the module. It's coming. And when I've done that, I can simply launch new AutoGen ref images, which is now available commandlet to me since I imported that module. And when I do, it will simply find all sequences that have been enabled in my Workbench for my deployment share and build one image for each. So take a long coffee break and we come back, you have 6, 7, 8, 10 images. There are no excuses for not automating everything. But there are some things that you can do to speed up the process. So if you go to my blog again and search for the magical keyword, like a boss. Bnos, that's a new word. I put together a list of resources on how to build reference images like a boss. So first of all, if you haven't tried out MDT and used it for build reference images, there are some basic guidance available, some step-by-step guidance on TechNet, and this guide is absolutely amazing. And the reason I know that is because I wrote it. Now, there is also a video that takes you step by step, and there is also, if you go to TechNet Virtual Labs, there is a ready-made lab that will help you build a reference image. If you've never seen MDT in your life before, well, you will probably not be here, but if you didn't, you will do that in 45 minutes, from nothing to finished. So you get a bunch of VMs on that side, you get a lab manual on the other side, and you can just go through them and have it working. But you can actually do some nice tricks to keep the image small. And it's available also now for Windows 7 images, that you can, before you sysprep it, you can clean out all the junk in the Vim file, all the leftovers from every single update that has been installed on that Vim. And you may think it's not of a big deal, but look at these sizes. Without cleaning, with cleaning. The image is about 1 gigabyte left. Not much maybe, but that's actually like 20-some% or 15%. And if you go to Mike's site, you can download a script that you simply add to the sequence, and that will detect which version of Windows you're running and do the necessary cleanup. Because Windows 8 and Windows 7 has different methods to run the cleanup job. But once you have that hotfix, life is good. You don't need it for Windows 8. What you also can do to speed up the process is the VM that you create. Assign 2 CPUs to it. It will reduce the time about 15 minutes for every capture that you do. So if you do 10 captures, you save a few hours. Also, you might have seen that when you use MDT to build a Windows 7 reference image, it's really fast when it starts the capture process. But then you try Windows 8 and you see that it starts, And then the progress bar sits for 15 minutes, and then it starts to capture. And that's because they were lazy when they implemented or wrote the 2013 version of MDT. They did not switch to DISM. They are still using the good old ImageX, which of course is deprecated but still available. But if you change that to a script or to use DISM using a modified script, you should save another 15 minutes for those images. What you also can do, if your manager didn't give you a solid-state drive, is to ask for more memory on the box, because there is a free RAM disk that you can download from Starwind. And what that RAM disk does is it will take memory and create what Windows thinks is a physical disk. In this case, a 20 gig physical disk, but it's memory. And then you place your VHDX or VMDK file on that disk when you build your VM. And I can tell you, you get some pretty good read and write and response times from a hard drive that is really memory. This is normally what you buy to your really high-end, SQL servers, memory that is really a hard drive, like a super cache. It's a free tool you can download. It's actually quite good. So that's reference images. And yes, I do love questions, if you have any. Okay, I will summarize the question. Why use MDT to build reference images? Why not use ConfigMgr? Why is it better? Okay. Where should I start? First of all, these guys. I'd like to have my software updates in my reference image. It simply makes sense to me. And there is an option in ConfigMgr that allows you to do that. So if I open up a sequence, I can do my Windows 7 sequence here. And assuming I have a bunch of updates in ConfigMgr and they are deployed, have to be deployed, I can drill down here and of course see my action. This is what ConfigMgr is using to install updates. Problem with this action is it doesn't work all the time. Especially it gets upset when you feed it with too many updates. The light touch equivalent doesn't do that. So I've seen customers spending hours, days, troubleshooting this. I've seen them copying and pasting this step many, many times with reboots in between to make sure to get all those updates in. Why not use another sequence that simply works out of the box? Why troubleshoot? Sorry? There are updates that requires multiple reboots. They will freak out if you do this action here. I can tell you there is a knowledge base article that lists those currently 8 updates. Light touch deals with them better than ConfigMgr does. It's not out of the world because you can add in a normal run command line action where you install these updates manually and have reboot in between. So you can fix the problem. But one of the reasons I use light touch is because the software updates action just works. And then I import that reference image into ConfigMgr. And ConfigMgr that installs software updates action works great when it's not being, doesn't have to deal with too many updates. Because now it's only the delta since I created my reference image until I deploy it. Another reason is that it's easy and fast. It's about twice as fast. And I'm not only talking about the actual build time here. I'm talking about the time it takes to manage the solution over a year. So if I spend 50 hours total in ConfigMgr, I will spend 25 to do the exact same thing with light touch. The result is the same. I get a WIM file, but it's faster. Another thing that I like about the light touch setup is there is a suspend action that I can add into the sequence if I want to. I can simply add in an action that will abort it at that point. So for example, down here, I have added that script. It's a default script. And what will happen is that when the sequence comes to that point, it will abort completely. I can reboot that machine 10 times. I can verify that everything is it's okay. I can take a snapshot of that VM, and when I'm happy, I simply double-click resume sequence, and it continues and does the rest. So if I could build a reference image today, I can simply save state and resume it 4 weeks from now and continue where it left off. So as you can see, I have a Windows Update action before suspend and after. You can't do this with a ConfigMgr sequence. You would have to complete the build first and then do it. So it's very easy in Light Touch to have a suspend action. Another thing that is not so much used these days, and I envision it to go completely away with Windows 10, even though it's still there. But those of you that came from the XP days into Windows 7, you have probably run into this function, this feature. What is it? What does it do? Well, it enables you to customize the admin profile to your heart's content, and once you're happy with it, when you deploy that image, you can have the admin profile copied to default user. And when we do things in Light Touch, we get an admin profile. When you deploy in ConfigMgr, you don't, because it installs as local system. And it simply turns out that it's difficult to copy something you don't have at deployment time. So I do this in Light Touch, and then I have ConfigMgr copy the admin profile to default user by simply switching the NA10 file. So that was some of the reasons for why I'm using Light Touch, or recommend using Light Touch. But the main thing is it just works. That's why. I don't like to have to spend hours troubleshooting. So I should mention one more. Compatibility. If you create your image in Light Touch, you can use that image with everything. VMware, VMM, ConfigMgr, VDS, Light Touch, everything that can apply a Vim file. If you build it with ConfigMgr, you have the reference image. It contains the client, even maybe an older version, that when you deploy it needs to be upgraded to the later version. When I build it in Light Touch, I don't have a client. It's clean. I can use it for everything. And if I deploy it with ConfigMgr, it will happily install the latest version of the client. Yes, question?
You just said what I was
Awesome. I will.
So if you use ConfigMgr to create a reference image, you will still have some traces to relate it to the command client, also relate to the registry values.
Exactly. There will be stuff in the image that are related to that client. Absolutely, yeah. All right. So that was reference images. Now we need to take that and do something with it. So we need to create sequences. And that can be done manually, and that's funny, the first 25 sequences that you create. The next 50 times you do it, it's not so funny to do it in the UI. It involves quite a lot of clicking, but everything can be automated through PowerShell. So I happen to have some PowerShell scripts here. So as you can see, I have currently 14 sequences on my site server. But I'm going to open up PowerShell prompt. Go to my demo folder, which is not on the D drive, it's on my E drive. Let's get in there. This PowerShell script is using the native ConfigMgr commandlet to create sequences. So since it's a native commandlet and I want to run it wherever I am, I need to import the module. So I will run that command to import the module, and I'm using a trick to find where that module is instead of hard coding the path. I'm simply asking, okay, where is the console? Over there, and then I get the stuff. Then I simply hard code in here some values that I'm going to use in my environment, the site code and the packages and whatnot. And of course, if you like, you can write functions that will find out the site code for you, etc. But I was lazy for this one. So I set those properties, and then I simply run the new sequence object, It will create a new sequence with that name and assign the following packages, etc., and do some configurations of it. So if I run this and go back to my console, the idea is that I should have 15 sequences when I refresh it. So go back to my console, refresh one more time because it's ConfigMgr. Now I have 15 sequences. One is named NIC. I can right click and I can do an edit. So what's wrong with this one? Sorry? Exactly, it's not integrated with MDT. This is just a native ConfigMgr sequence, which you should not be using. You should do the integration. It adds a few more features to OSD. 280 additional features. And the likelihood that you are going to need at least one of them is really high. I will show some in this session, but you want this. But so that's no good. And it turned out that even though ConfigMgr team, since the last 15 months, are also developing the MDT code, you would kind of think they would add in options to do that through PowerShell. They didn't. It's simply impossible to use the native commandlet to create an integrated sequence. But then it turned out, how did we automate ConfigMgr before Service Pack 1, before all these fancy commandlets? How did we do it? 3 letters. WMI, exactly, WMI. So we can still do that. So for example, what I can do, have you tried exporting a sequence? Right-click and do an export of a sequence that has 112 packages. That takes about 45 minutes on a good day. But then you get the sequence, of course. But through PowerShell, I can export every single sequence a bit faster than 45 minutes. So I have a folder here, demo, exported sequences. As you can see, it's currently empty. I will select the first 13 lines, and yes, this is also available for download. Search for PowerShell or something. Maybe search for the site code, it's easier to find it. So I run the script. It took maybe 7 seconds, 6, 5. And I go back to my folder. Now I have every single sequence exported. So I can open this in Notepad. This is my Windows 8 sequence, as you would see. Could be easier to open it up in Explorer or another decent XML viewer. But this is the entire sequence being exported. Now, if I wanted a new sequence, I will open PowerShell, new sequence. This script was originally written by David O'Brien, and he's actually here at NIC. So if you ever have a chance to go see him, do that. He kind of deserves that. He flew from Australia to here to present, and I was like, wow, that's cool. I came through Copenhagen. That's a little bit of a balance. So new sequence. Wait a minute. Import sequence. Not new sequence. There is a difference. New sequence I was running before. It doesn't take parameters, this one does. So site code, sequence name, my happy sequence, have to be named that. An input file, and then you pick one of the exported files. So I will pick my Windows 8.1, and I run this. Bam! Go back to the console, refresh. I now have 16 sequences. I have my happy sequence somewhere, here. which, as you can see, is MDT sequence. Now, having these scripts, if you are about to do a major change through one of your sequences, is it difficult to export it so you have a backup? And if needed, create a new file from that backup? No. You can have an entire list of archives, old sequences. They are not listed here, but they are stored as XML file in your environment. And if you ever need one of those again, well, it wasn't that difficult to create a new sequence from a backup, right? And much, much faster than export, import in here. Much, much faster. If you want to go even further, I actually wrote a... I'm not sure we were entirely sober when we dig up the name for the book. It's named Stealing with Pride. And the site is normal responsive, but yeah. You can recognize it because it's a pirate ship on the book. And we don't mean that you should steal. It means don't reinvent the wheel. When there is stuff that other people already developed and put out for free to use it. So we wrote a book about advanced OSD customizations. And the gentleman who co-wrote that book with me, he has written a really nice, I don't have it here, but you can download it from his blog, mycoster.com. It's an event handler for sequences. You probably know that everything you do in the console triggers an event in the back end. And through WMI you can find out. So he wrote a handler that every time you even think about editing a sequence, it will create a backup and apply a version number to it. So by using PowerShell, we suddenly get version handling of sequences in a way I think it's actually better than the include ones. But so instead of clicking around, you can do automation like this.
You should watch your security bytes on those exports because the WMI event handler exports the passwords as context. So definitely check that.
The comment was when you do an export, make sure you take care of security issues because password can be sent in clear text, etc. Yes, absolutely. That is correct. Normally when I run these operations, it's normally either on the site server itself or on a machine that I have sort of control of, so hopefully it shouldn't be a problem, but yeah, technically it could be. So that's a good point. Yes. Then we have one of the 280 features that I really like about the MDT integration is the monitoring feature, which works both for Light Touch and for ConfigMgr. It's real-time monitoring, but there is a small caveat to it that I will explain in a bit. But let me show how to enable it. First of all, you install MDT somewhere, you create a deployment share somewhere, and in properties of that share, you enable monitoring. And what that checkbox will do, it will create a small compact SQL database and enable a web service that is running on that box. And by changing a single line, either in ConfigMgr or in Light Touch, they will start to report real-time deployment to that web service. So if I start the client here, you currently see I have nothing in my monitoring node. Let me find a client here. Go to a clean snapshot. Configure it to boot on an ISO. The reason is I have two Pixie servers on the same subnet right now, and they are kind of fighting. So I will use the boot image. Cold coffee is not good. So it's coming shortly. This is a normal production deployment, so I will be prompted for a password that will verify against Active Directory. That's basically the difference between Light Touch and ConfigMgr when you authenticate ConfigMgr just have a password on the boot image itself, a single password. Light Touch has the AD integration there. And the cool thing about the AD integration is that the wizard that pops up, where you can select sequences and apps and all that, you can have it display different information for different people logging in. That's one of the built-in features in the Light Touch wizard. So I will select my Windows 8 image. I will give it a name, PC 5, 6, 7, 8. Select a few applications and start my deployment. Now, if I go to my server, in the monitoring node, I will have shortly real-time monitoring of that deployment. And not only I have it visible here, but I can also double-click it and I can remote into that machine if I have enabled Dart in my boot image. And that's something MDT helps with as well. So if you guys have the MDOP license, you also have Dart. And you can add that both to the Light Touch image and to the ConfigMgr boot image. Because sometimes when you do deployments, you want to interact with it. You want to do things, troubleshoot. And that's really difficult to do when that machine is in another city in another country. And then having to someone on the phone trying to convince them to please press F8 and find me the log files and do net use and send them to me. If that person is not technical savvy, it will be a long phone call. So how do I enable this in ConfigMgr then? Well, the service is the same. The line that you add to the ini file is the same. The only thing you need to do is create that boot image of yours. So I will close this deployment, go back to my ConfigMgr site server, right-click boot images, and since I have extended with MDT, I have this option available. So I will select that, give it a path where I want to store it, and test it. I'll give it a name test. Because in the wizard, and by the way, don't bother about this one anymore. You had to do this in previous WinP versions, not anymore. Why? Because if Windows detects you have 1 gig of memory or more on the box, it will automatically set it to 512 meg. Doesn't care about this at all. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have less than that, don't deploy Windows to that machine. Deploy something else. So don't worry about that. But here, since I have installed Dart on this box and have the integration, I can now select it. It's not available until you install Dart and copy the tools, the cab files over to the installation directory. And that's all it takes. So many of you will see this, and many of you will see me create a few more deployments through PowerShell just to prove that I can have more deployments. So I will create some events, and I'm not using this one. I was testing when the UI would break, and that's around 5,000 objects deployed at the same time. Then the monitor feature gets upset. So those of you that are deploying more than 5,000 machines at the exact same time, this is not for you. But I have one that just creates 10 events. So I'm creating 10 deployments really fast. And then I go back to monitoring. So now I have my PC machine and a few bunch more that are completed at this point in time. Because I can also use PowerShell to read this information. So I can just connect to the web service and have my real-time deployment here in a grid view in PowerShell. Of course, I can also use this one, the Workbench, as a tool. It's something you can install on your admin workstation, and you're not just connected to that remote deployment share. You can also use Excel to do this. So I can open up Excel, and let me just get a file with a link here. Faster typing. So I'm opening Excel, a blank spreadsheet, and I will go to data and I will connect it to an OData feed, which that web service is. And I will paste in the link, wait patiently. Computers, thank you. And now I have my real-time deployments in Excel. So you can have a nice, LED TV at the office, having real-time deployment. And since this is Excel, you can do coloring. You can do green for good, warning for yellow, and red for stuff that breaks. Good stuff. Or a web browser. Or there is actually a guy. Sometimes there are people who don't like the Workbench, and I don't blame that. It's not the best MMC console there is. But there is a fellow Microsoft Consulting Services, Alexei. He wrote a nice script. Wake up, please. Hey, it's coming. I did select it. Yeah, here you come. That instead of dumping the info to the Workbench, it creates shortcuts in a folder on the server somewhere. So you just open Explorer and you double click the shortcut, and it will automatically open up the remote viewer and connect to that machine. So it's a nice addition as well. So a few of you in this room may go home and try this. Johan said this was great, let's try it. And some of you will be very happy about this. But for some of you, within less than 3 weeks, the site server will die. And it will be because you enabled monitoring. It turns out that when you develop web services, and I kind of like to do that, it's fun. Friday afternoon, writing some code. It's nice, it feels good. The rest of the family will think you're nuts, but it's okay. When you develop web services, you can enable tracing, which is great when you develop a web service, to get some debugging info. And before you ship it to production, you're supposed to kind of disable that again. They didn't. So, a web service have a config file, and so does Microsoft's web service for MDT. And it turns out that if you have, but only if, you have a temp folder on your site server, or whatever machine you install the monitoring on, it will start to log to that file. It doesn't do this if that folder doesn't exist, and it's not there by default in Windows. But there are quite many people in this room, I think, that may have a temp folder on the C drive. It's not that big of a deal, but my record so far is 5 gig per day. And it doesn't truncate the log file. So you guys do the math here. Amount of free space on my site server divided by 5 will give you the number of days before the site server dies. So I recommend 2 things here. Either change this to a dedicated volume, only if this file on that volume, it doesn't care if it goes beyond the limit, or simply remove this, or at least change it to maybe not log anything or everything, but error instead of, information, something. But please remember this. This file is evil, but it can be made nice again. So, anyway. At least I've told you, and it's recorded, so I have it on record. Now, other than that, there are quite many things that can go wrong in the sequence. Luckily, in ConfigMgr and LightTouch, there are also a good few options to debug things. So let me show a few of those. And of course, we're using C and Trace for this, most of it. So let me start the deployment. I'm going to shut down my, or save my MDT server. I don't do that anymore. So I can go to a clean machine and pixie boot it. So I will pixie boot this machine. It's a UEFI machine, generation 2, F12. That's the wrong one. Gen 2. Try again. It looks different when you boot. This is UEFI Pixie. The other was BIOS Pixie. Okay, it failed. Why? Why couldn't I pixie boot? How do you troubleshoot this? SMS pixel log file, which is on your distribution point. So in this case, I know why it failed. Or I hope I know why it failed. Otherwise, this will be an embarrassing demo. I have deployed this machine once before. And when you do, it creates unknown objects if you're deploying to unknown machines. So I need to search for my unknown objects. And well, in this case, I only have 2, so I will just go ahead and delete them. Otherwise, I would normally double-click them, verify the MAC address, and delete the right one. But in this environment, I really don't care. So I'm deleting these objects, and I will try the deployment again. Didn't like that at all. This was funny. What can possibly go wrong in a live demo? I do deploy a few machines for test. Luckily, I named them the same. It's either that or a feature I have discovered with UEFI. Let me show you. Sometimes when you redeploy a machine many times, what you will find is that we're going to create multiple files in here for UEFI, and that really freaks out the machine sometimes. So I've been doing a lot of snapshots, so let me try to just spin up a new one. I will call it Kent client for luck. Generation 2, bit of a memory, on a network, a disk, and I'm good to go. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds to pixel a boot image over the network. This is possible because 1, I'm not using VMware. 2, I'm using UEFI. 3, I have configured the window size, the RAM disk block size to 16, which is really fast on UEFI-based machines. Otherwise, this may take 45 seconds or a minute. VMware currently does not support these packages, so it will sort of dislike it. So keep the default if you're running VMware. So I'm starting my setup. Selecting one of my sequences. And if something goes wrong, obviously you will press F8, and seam trace is always available in the boot image. The default log location is the X drive Windows temp SMS TS log. But what I recommend that you do on your sequences is the following. First of all, if you are deploying Windows 8, add an action in the beginning that shuts the sequence down and reboots it once completed. Because if you don't, you may see the following. It's only for Windows 8 and Windows 10. But if you add a final reboot, you don't get this. And you only see it once. You click OK and you can log in again, but it's not very nice to the users. What I also recommend that you do, if I go back here, is that if I open my debug sequence, which I've had here, the one I selected, I have also added in a change to the dialog timeout. The default is 15 minutes. I recommend to change it to something more. So I get some actually additional time when debugging Windows. I also recommend to add in pauses to your sequence. In this case, just a script that will break it, so you can troubleshoot that step alone. There is another action I like to add. I have it here. There is a component from MDT that will give you a command prompt that is launched as the sequence itself. So when you test your scripts and such, you can run them over and over and over again until they're good and debug them. And then when you're done, you add them to the normal package and you deploy them. But this is just to reduce the time it takes to troubleshoot Windows. So Service UI is the component, and if you do an internet search on that one, you will simply find that. With that, I'm done. Thank you, guys.